Here we are in the deep jungle of the suburb of Tuggerah. The garden that we've got here is full of exotic plants. A little bit overgrown and lovely little wood, lots of flora and fauna of the Australiana variety. And there's an old swing chair, and there's a Buddha, and there's a lovely backyard and there was a big giant snake here once, 6 foot long. And when we tried to look for it, it had disappeared so quickly, we didn't know what happened to it. Yeah. Okay, here's the end of the Undine story. Undine, yeah. She said, I'll ride you with a tight rein this time to make you a stayer. And I managed 5 or 6, 7, 8 minutes and didn't shoot. What a stud. I was now the guy in Sweet Bird of Youth by Tennessee Williams. We lay squashed together, smoking and telling jokes in the morning light. Undine said, I fucked a jumps jockey once. My mate Gina was a strapper. Geez, she fucked a lot of hoops. I reckon no one fucks as good as a hurdle jockey. It's the practice they get going over the jumps and not falling off. There was a knock on the door. Undine whispered, It's the bloody maid. Don't answer, and she'll go away. A sign on the wall read, Guests must vacate before 10 a.m. A key turned and a middle-aged Italian lady came in. Undine jumped out of bed naked and screamed in the lady's face, Get the fuck out of here, you dago bitch! The maid fled. I grabbed my jeans and looked for a fire escape, but there was none. Undine seemed unconcerned, so I said, I'm off, and headed for the stairs. The lift door clanged open, and out came a maid and a man in a suit who yelled, Get out immediately! The police have been called! Undine rumbled down the corridor with her blouse open, her shoulders moving left as her breasts swung right. I tried to button her blouse, but she pushed me away. The maid was yelling, and the bloke pushed Undine to the elevator. I ran in to press the down button. We descended in unexpected silence. Tourists in the foyer turned to look at us. When Undine saw no cops, she turned elegant and in an upper-class voice proclaimed, I'll never stay in this rat-infested place again. Pulling up her sleeve, she showed a scratch. I was bitten by a rat and found rat excreta on my pillow. The tourist looked interested and the manager blushed. We giggled our way towards King's Cross. At the top of William Street, she pulled me inside a wine bar. She grabbed a morning paper off of 2 old blokes and said, Come on, you bludgers, we're going to the races. No taxi would pick us up as a group, so I hailed one on my own, and when it stopped, Undine and the 2 old blokes dived in, and we shared a bottle of Purple Para Invalid Port that Undine had bought to keep us going. This was my first time at Randwick Races. In early 63, the admission price was a token amount anybody could afford. I think it was 4 shillings or something, or maybe 2 shillings, can't remember. The upper class toffs had the members section in which to lay large wages, and the working class paid a few shillings and entered the hullabaloo of the flat. The flat was where the poorer people went. It was inside the course back then. Nowadays, everything is outside of the course, and inside I think is for parking cars. But back then, the inside of the course, inside the oval, was for the poorer people. We passed through the turnstiles and crossed a crew-cut grass running track where every 40 minutes thoroughbred horses thundered by. Undine gave me 2 shillings for a bet and took the others to the beer pavilion. I gambled away me dough by the second race, so I went looking for her. I didn't want to lose my first sugar mummy. The old beer pavilion was an institution. In winter, punters froze, but now, in summer, the joint was a sweat box. The bar was wooden planks on trestles, and it reeked of beer slop. The floor was trampled grass, and a dimly lit serve-yourself cafeteria was full of punters who ate, smoked, drank, argued, fought, laughed, and yelled. Men sweated in shirt sleeves, and somebody quipped, "Those poor toffs in the members' stand have to wear a jacket and tie." Come race time, they rushed to take vantage points by the rail. There was no TV monitors back then, and one had to battle for a good position, or a good posse, as we used to say. Punting was an action sport. After a race, the multitude poured back to shout orders to a dozen hard-working barmen. Undine loved the raucous bar and the dedicated drinkers, and I wrangled another shilling from her and backed a 4-to-1 shot that won. When I returned, she was yelling, "You mob are all puffs," and punching a sailor in white. Pushing through the throng were 2 policemen in blue. So I turned yellow and disappeared. 1963, summertime, January. Next afternoon, I noticed bums outside a church in Kent Street. I'd heard there was a soup kitchen there, so I joined them. 7 days a week, the charity gave out thin soup and bread rolls at 6:30 a.m. and 4:30 p.m. Kent Street didn't preach. I ate there 30 or 40 times and did not notice which denomination ran it. After a wait in church pews, about 30 of us filed in order of arrival, a row at a time, down ancient wooden stairs to a dining room with 10 long benches around 5 long wooden tables. We lined up at an opening to get tucker. You knew you were with fair dinkum bums because of the faint urine-type odour that 10% gave off with. When I'd been there a few times, I didn't even notice it anymore. Around the walls, a series of illustrations featured 1. A man eating with his wife and kids in a nice home. 2. The same man drunk in a pub, buying drinks for everyone. 3. The man yelling at his family as they cower in fear. 4. The man lying in a gutter looking poverty-stricken. 5. A preacher escorts him through the door of a church. 6. The last picture shows him back with his family, happy and sober. Enough said. QED. After the meal, we could take a parcel of semi-stale cakes and pies that were donated, I heard later, by caterers from the racetrack. At night, I watched television in Grace Brothers department store window in Broadway. In the early days of black and white TV, stores put a demonstration set in the window and people gathered outside to watch. Families wrapped in blankets sat on chairs that they'd brought from home. They'd watch until the channel closed at 10:30 p.m. in 1963. And on the corner of Pitt Street and Hay Street near the original Capitol Theatre, an evangelist group led by tiny old Ada Green belted out warnings where you'd end up if you didn't heed God's word. Damon Runyon types gathered to hear her and laugh at or punch erudite hecklers. Ada gave bums who asked nicely a 4-shilling meal ticket to Mason's Cafe, a greasy spoon in Elizabeth Street. It was still there in 2002. I filmed a Chop Fest short there. You look up my old channel for a film called Misunderstanding. If you want to see that, I'll leave a link to it. Ada had an Aboriginal who sounded like the Crystals. Now, the Crystals were a black girl group who had a hit called He's a Rebel. But Ada's Aboriginal belted out gospel with the same sort of voice. And I wondered why she hadn't a record contract. She was so good. Her voice made me aware of my loneliness. Beatniks and hippies were getting mentioned in magazines like Pix and Post and Weekend. But early 63, I'd found none. They were around, but I'd been searching in the wrong places. I hitched south to Melbourne and I got stuck in Ballarat. I climbed the fence of a cattle sale yard looking for a place to sleep. The moon watched me creep through the maze of cattle yards. An auction room was unlocked, so I snuck inside. The seats were long enough to stretch out on and were padded with thin cushions. I drifted off thinking, there'll be some beatniks in Melbourne. I got clean clothes from the Salvation Army and a labouring job in a hot Port Melbourne foundry. I lasted 2 weeks until payday, then I left. I rented a nice room with a balcony in Domain Road, overlooking the Melbourne Botanical Park. I studied Buddhism and meditated in the Oriental section of the gardens, and I was determined to become enlightened, like the Zen saints I'd read about. My rent was due, and I would run out of money, so I applied at Woolworths with a fake reference from Coles and sold men's toiletries. It was 2 weeks until my first pay, so I stole from the lolly counter. I didn't know any Melbourne soup kitchens, so I lived on buttered Weet Bix, Vegemite and bananas. Too alienated to talk to my fellow room renters or workmates, I spent time vainly searching the city for a beatnik coffee shop. I should have tried Carlton and Fitzroy. There was a great one there, but I didn't learn about this until years later. And when I went that way, I saw from the seat in my tram, I saw tough-looking hoodlums on corners. So I was a little bit chicken and didn't have the guts to explore too heartily. So I stayed in my room, meditating and listening to AM radio. There was no FM back then. Melbourne had 4 pop stations. Adelaide had only 2. But I'd pretend Melbourne was London. Sydney was New York. And later on, King's Cross was Greenwich Village. Poverty hones your imagination. There was little chance I'd get to exotic cities, so to block any longings, I became a pretending master. Unfortunately, hunger isn't satisfied by fantasy. And then I lost the wages that I did have at the dog track. Okay, that's all for now.